Mark Carney has been called a lot of things. Good in a crisis by Mark Carney himself. Carbon tax Carney by the Conservatives. But this week, Ontario Premier Doug Ford came up with a new one.
I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full of all sorts of stuff. Now he's taking off back to the North Pole. He's going to sort it out.
I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, what's in Mark Carney's sled? Could it be a deal with Donald Trump? Internal Trade Minister Chrystia Freeland joins us. Also, what should Canada build? And can so-called decarbonized oil be part of the fast-track project mix? Two big project experts weigh in. Plus, it's tough out there.
It sucks, just trying over and over and over again to get a job or just any sort of income is very hard.
Too many young Canadians are struggling with the quest to find a job. A closer look at why, the role of AI, and what the Minister for Jobs is willing to do about it. But first, can Mark Carney keep his elbows up while texting with Trump? The House is now in session. On Monday, the Premiers and the Prime Minister gathered to talk about boosting Canada's economy, and by Wednesday, Donald Trump was dealing our economy another blow, hiking aluminum and steel tariffs to 50%. But the Prime Minister and the President have quietly been texting and calling, and there's some question of just how soon the two countries will strike a deal. Chrystia Freeland was at that big meeting with the premiers in Saskatoon. She is the Transport and Internal Trade Minister. She's also a veteran of the Canada-US file. We spoke Friday afternoon. Hello, Minister. Welcome back to the House.
It's great to be with you.
We heard some pretty big numbers about how much of a difference boosting internal trade could make to Canada's economy. But the part that you fundamentally bear responsible for, the federal piece, how much of a difference could you make?
So I've talked to many economists about that, and we are looking, the public service at getting a very robust analysis. And as soon as we get a very specific number, I'll let you know. The reality, though, is the federal part is the smallest part. This is principally about provinces and territories acting. Why this legislation is important, though, is I think that if we, the federal government, want to really be encouraging provinces and territories to do this, it certainly behooves us to do our part. And that's why actually I suggested to the Prime Minister before the election that we, the federal government, needed to move fast. We needed to unilaterally lift federal barriers. He liked the idea. He campaigned on it. We have a mandate to do it. But I think the more important part is the enthusiasm that we're seeing in the provinces and territories. We have seen just in recent months 7 different pieces of legislation across the country, provinces saying now is the moment to do it. There is a robust estimate that if we do everything, this could add $200 billion to our GDP.
So that would involve getting rid of things like supply management, which I'm pretty sure you're not ready to do.
No, it actually wouldn't.
Okay, I have seen differing analysis, but you say that's...
I've been asked that question, and I like to do my homework. And so actually this morning, I spoke to Trevor Tombe, who is one of the economists who did the analysis that found that $200 billion. Mm-hmm. And the $200 billion analysis is about the impact of mutual recognition, which is the path that provinces and territories are on. So that is a little bit of a red herring.
Okay, you are going to pass the bill by Canada Day? Is that the pledge? Because that seems to be what the Prime Minister has said in some forums. Your platform says table the legislation. The Prime Minister has said we're going to get it done.
So I was standing beside the Prime Minister today when he did a press conference talking about this, and he was asked that question, and he said, I want to pass this legislation before the House rises. I agree with him. Let's do it.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about tariffs. You spent the whole election telling Canadians your elbows up. You're going to fight for them. The government has reduced some counter tariffs, and right now you're not putting any in place to push back on Trump increasing steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%. How is that elbows up?
So the Prime Minister and Minister LeBlanc are the Canadian leaders in charge of this negotiation. Having led a negotiation myself, I know how important it is to not have other voices in the space. And one thing that the Prime Minister has said, which was absolutely my motto during the NAFTA negotiations, is negotiating in public is not a good idea. So I really think that now is a moment to give the Prime Minister, give Minister LeBlanc the space they need. What I do also want to say, and this is important because people are losing their jobs, people are really scared. We are absolutely committed to supporting our workers, to supporting our industries, and the Prime Minister was very clear today that the tariffs are unjustified and illegal.
We learned this week that the Prime Minister and the President have been texting, they have been calling. Canadians will want to know, how close are we to a deal between Canada and the U.S. that could see the tariffs removed?
Again, the Prime Minister has been really clear about not negotiating in public. And he's also been clear, and this is the point of the legislation that we're putting forward, that at the end of the day, we cannot control the U.S. We cannot control Donald Trump. I think Canadians recognize that. We can control ourselves. And that's why this One Canada legislation is so important. This is about Canadians responding to an unprecedented crisis. And it is about Canadians saying, given this crisis, let's build Canada. Internal trade, it is a policy that costs us nothing. But we do need support. All of us as Canadians need to support the provinces. We need to be sure we're a minority in Parliament, so we need support of the opposition to pass this legislation. It can add $200 billion to our GDP. That's a lot. It can also knit our country together. Because one thing, speaking to small businesses, one thing that I've heard about this is traditionally, because the U.S. market is so big and so attractive, what a lot of businesses have done is they start in their home market and then they turn south. If we can remove those barriers, it's going to make it easier for Canadian businesses instead to turn to fellow Canadians. This is a nation-building project economically, but also in terms of building us as a stronger country that is more knit together.
A minute ago, I asked you about elbows up, and you said, there are other folks in that space. But during the Liberal leadership, you said things like, if you hit us, we will hit back. We will not escalate, but we will never back down. Now you sort of have to, it sounds like, bite your tongue and say other people are in that space. When Donald Trump said in the Oval Office, in front of Prime Minister Mark Carney, that Donald Trump called you a terrible person. Do you have to bite your tongue? And is that hard for you?
Well, on those particular comments, what's been really nice is the reaction of fellow Canadians. And the reaction I have uniformly had is people saying to me, that shows me that you fought hard for Canada. And you got a good deal for us.
Do you get sick of this guy taking a run at you, though, Chrystia Freeland? Because it's happened often, many times, several times he said some pretty negative things about you.
I will always be proud to stand for Canada and to fight for Canada. And the people whose good opinion matters to me are Canadians.
On the upcoming G7 meeting, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is invited here. Mark Carney has invited him here. But in the last year, the government, the previous government of which you were a part, has accused his government of being behind the killing of a Canadian citizen, as well as other violence, extortion, and intimidation. Why is Modi welcome in this country?
The Prime Minister, I stood beside him as he gave a press conference on Friday talking about our One Canada legislation. He was asked that question, and he gave a really clear response. What the Prime Minister said was, in the first instance, one of his jobs at the G7 is to be the leader of probably the most important multilateral group in the world. And at that multilateral table, his view as president of the G7 and the view of partners in that group that he spoke to is India as a huge economy is an important part of the conversation. And the Prime Minister also said at that press conference that it's important to be able to have a conversation with major players in the global economy.
But we make decisions. We don't invite Vladimir Putin to the G7. He was part of the G8. He's not part of this group. We make decisions about where the line is. And I appreciate that what Russia is doing and the specific accusations about India are quite different. But it's not as if it's apolitical. Because the Prime Minister seemed to say, well, this isn't about politics. It's about getting people around the table. We make political decisions. What would you say to people in this country who feel that they have been harassed, threatened, potentially the victim of violence, and that it may have ties to the Indian government, and they now see Narendra Modi invited to this country?
So, Catherine, you sort of caught yourself, but I do just have to underscore it is not appropriate to compare other leaders to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, and it's important because scale,
yes,
it is
I appreciate that.
It's important to really underscore the very distinctiveness of what Vladimir Putin is doing. He has launched an entirely illegal invasion of Ukraine. He is violating Ukraine's sovereignty. He is trying to destroy Ukraine's democracy. He is killing Ukrainians every single day. He is the most dangerous revisionist power in the world and is seeking to destroy the rules-based international order that our grandparents put in place after the Second World War. So I think we need to be very careful about drawing comparisons between him and other world leaders.
I do accept that. My point is that lines are drawn, decisions are made, and I take your point that there is enormous difference. But what makes it acceptable to invite this leader to our country when some people in this country might say that they feel victimized by choices made by his government?
What I think is important to say, and I think this is important for all Canadians to hear, and again, this is something that the Prime Minister was very emphatic about at the press conference where I stood beside him, is independent legal processes will always be independent in Canada. And our government, and I don't want to make this partisan. I think this would be true of any Canadian government, will always put the security and the safety of Canadians in Canada first, and Canadians need to know that.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Chrystia Freeland, thank you for your time today.
It's great to be with you.
Chrystia Freeland is the Minister of Transport and Internal Trade.
We're united, we're going to build together, and we're going to build for all. We're going to build for all Canadians. That's what came out of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Mark Carney left his meeting with the premiers this week insisting he's ready to build big. But how big? And can this country do that and still address climate change? Yoda Kokino's just co-authored a report called Build Big Things as part of her work with the Public Policy Forum. She's also a former Director General at Natural Resources Canada. Andrew Leach is the co-director of the Institute of Public Economics at the University of Alberta. Thank you both for joining me.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with what came out of Saskatoon. I was there. I was struck by that sort of giddiness that we referred to from the leaders. How meaningful was that meeting in terms of getting the country building, as Mark Carney says he aspires to do?
Well, I think it was game-changing, and it was a meeting focused on growing Canada's economy. And I really was struck by the comments by the premiers coming out of the meeting, how they can't remember the last time that they had been in a First Minister's meeting where the focus was just on the economy, which should be job one for every country. So for me, I think it was a fantastic start to what is going to be a very difficult road ahead, but a necessary road given what's going on.
Andrew Leach, Doug Ford said, this is the best meeting we've had in 10 years. But I think for the average Canadian, it's a bit hard to get excited about any kind of meeting. How important do you think it was?
Well, I think that comment told some of the story that Yoda brought up to say it was a new approach, a new attitude, a new feeling. But I think you also have to take Premier Ford's next little bit where he talks about the Prime Minister as Santa Claus with a sled full of toys. And I worry that the Prime Minister has set himself up with almost sky-high expectations, and that, everybody thinks, to use Fredericton MP David Miles' banjo for Christmas, everyone thinks their banjo's in the sled, and whether it is or not, we're gonna find out.
Banjo as a metaphor for infrastructure, that is a new one.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about where this goes. All of the premiers could bring in a list of up to 5 projects. So there could be the potential for upwards of 70. Presumably, they're not all going to get the okay from the federal government. What's a reasonable number of projects for the government to fast track?
Well, in our Build Big Things playbook, which was recently released, we talk about probably a group of 20 what we call no regrets projects, which are nation building projects. And the reason why I say about 20 is because these are very complex projects. They are very capital intensive, and they will take years to build out. And if we want to get them through in a 2-year time frame, we can't push forward 100 projects. That's just not going to work.
And to be clear, you say that 2-year time frame. That is for fast tracking the regulations. That is not for building
Exactly.
these things.
People keep talking about the 2 years. Well, that's to get through the regulatory and permitting process.
Okay.
Then these projects have to get built, and that takes time.
Andrew, in terms of helping us see this, a lot of the focus went on Danielle Smith's comments about pipelines. But I'm wondering, there are a lot of different kinds of projects here. We're talking about hydro, critical minerals, nuclear power, wind power, ports. The list goes on and on. Where do you think Canada should be putting the focus in terms of the kinds of projects it builds?
Well, I think the focus here has to be on the process, not the projects. That we have to say, how can we create a process that gets us away from trying to find 100 ways to say no to giving the political support up front where it's needed, and then I guess finding ways to get to yes. So, we have a process and we've had it in place. It's not new to Prime Minister Trudeau's legislation, where you almost think of there being off-ramps and a series of off-ramps, both provincially and federally, for major projects where there's an opportunity for more analysis, for more delay, and for essentially getting away from the tough political decision-making. And I think what you want is to bring that political decision-making up front, and you can do that for maybe 15 or 20 projects and say, look, this is something that we as a country, I don't know if it's going to be no regrets, but, limited regret as a country, limited cost as a country.
Doesn't have the same ring to it.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm ruining it a little bit. But that small number of things where the government can say, federally, the full support of the government is behind this. And then, hopefully you have that same story at the provincial level, and we're not just duplicating process for the sake of avoiding challenging decisions.
I take Andrew's point, Yoda, about how it has to be about the process working better. But in order for people to see this, what kinds of projects do you think should be at the top of the list?
It needs to be the full range. I know right now people are seized with oil and gas projects and pipelines, and they may get built. But it's broader than that. It's making sure we expand our electricity grid. The capacity for the energy that we require as a country is starting to run out. So this is like number one on the list, in my view.
And I just want to jump in on that, because this is something the Liberals have talked about. But again, there's all this sense of momentum. Carney's talking about speeds previously thought impossible. Building an east-west energy grid is going to take a lot of time.
It absolutely will. And maybe it won't be a full east-west grid. Maybe it'll be a regional grid. But we have to start thinking about what these projects look like and bringing all the players together, rowing in the same direction. Because right now, or at least up till now, everyone was going off in their own direction. And I would also like to say we need critical minerals projects. We need technology projects like small modular reactors, carbon capture and utilization and storage, critically important. So I see this as the full range of projects.
Is there going to have to be a trade-off between getting these projects built and the environment, concerns about climate change?
I don't think so. I think if we set a marker down that it's going to be a 2-year process, I think then it is incumbent about whichever level of government carries out the environmental assessment to kind of reverse engineer it to make it happen over the 2 years. We have proposed in our report to build big things, one project, one review. That's going to speed things up. We propose other things like doing the regulatory and the permitting process concurrently, because they're often sequential. That adds to time. So there are a lot of things that can be done. And I think the first wave of projects are going to be the test case. And we're going to know if we can actually do this in 2 years and maintain our high standards of environmental responsibility.
Andrew, there's a lot of talk about if there is a pipeline, it would involve decarbonized oil. Can you give us the short version of what that means?
Well, I certainly don't want that to be my word. I think when you're dealing with the oil we're moving in a pipeline, you're moving hydrocarbons. And so the oil that's in the pipeline is going to be the same regardless, for all intents and purposes, regardless of how and where it's produced and what the emissions are from production. And for years, remember the industry told us for years, you got to worry about the wells to wheels emissions, and the production emissions are a small share of the overall barrel. And now all of a sudden it's, well, we're going to decarbonize the oil sands. We're going to ship decarbonized oil just by decarbonizing that small share of production emissions. So I think we do want to be careful what we promise. The other thing that I worry about when we talk about these big carbon capture and sequestration promises is these are not new, right? Canada's first ever report to the United Nations on climate change in 1994 talked about an industry government consortium to decarbonize the oil sands and coal power with carbon capture and sequestration. And we barely got off the ground. We had, from Premier Stelmach, Premier Redford, big promises about carbon capture and sequestration, more industry government consortia. So there's a lot of time, a lot of capital, billions and billions of dollars between us and even decarbonized oil production at any facility in Alberta. So I think we want to be careful about this sort of grand bargain and make sure we know exactly what's written in the fine print about the decarbonization part.
The grand bargain and the fine print. That's a good point.
And of course, we had a grand bargain before, which was carbon pricing in return for Trans Mountain. And it seems like the Trans Mountain pipeline is there and carbon pricing is eroding pretty quickly in Canada. So I think people will be right to say, will the grand bargain, quote unquote, still be in place after the pipeline is built?
How quickly do we think we could see the first projects built under this kind of fast tracking, Yoda?
Well, I don't know about built, but definitely approved. I'm hoping within that 2-year time frame, and it all depends when the clock starts, if I may put it that way. The government has a lot to do to get itself organized internally to start reviewing these projects. So it's difficult to say right now, but there is a short window of time for this government to demonstrate progress. So the pressure is definitely on.
Okay. Andrew, Yoda, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The University of Alberta's Andrew Leach and Yoda Kokinos of the Public Policy Forum. Lots more coming up on the House podcast, including youth unemployment. So many young Canadians are struggling to find jobs. What will the government do about it? I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode. And tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. It's not just tariffs and national projects taking up oxygen on Parliament Hill. The Liberals have pitched a new law with sweeping border security powers. Public Safety Minister Gary Ananda-Sangri is calling the legislation a win for Canada and a way to tackle concerns from our southern neighbours.
This is about delivering a win for Canada and ensuring that our borders are safer, our communities are safer. And of course, we're responding to some of the concerns that have been posed by the White House.
But does the plan go too far in infringing on the rights of migrants and the civil liberties of all Canadians? Here to break down the new bill is David Reevely, an Ottawa correspondent for The Logic. David, welcome to the House.
Thanks for having me.
So this new legislation, Bill C2, was tabled on Tuesday. Can you take us through what new powers the federal government wants on immigration to start?
Do we have all day to talk about it?
We do not.
It is a huge bill, and it does a lot of things. On immigration in particular, the idea behind it is that it cleans up some of the hiccups in the asylum process and will make it easier for the system that deals with refugee applications to process them in a faster time period. And it also, though, gives the minister and the cabinet power to disallow certain applications, to remove status from people who are in the system and kick them out, and to disallow whole categories of documents and other materials that might be parts of applications. So it gives the government a lot of power over individuals and their applications.
And it will, for instance, make it harder for some folks to claim asylum. Like, it really restricts the periods when, we were seeing a lot of international students coming in. They're getting towards the end of their time here. They're claiming asylum. That would no longer be possible under this legislation.
That's right. One of the provisions says that if you enter Canada by other means, then a student visa would be an example of it, and you intend to file a refugee claim, an asylum claim, then you have to do it within a year of arriving. And if you enter the country irregularly, so at a border crossing formerly like Roxham Road or some other place like that, you have to file your claim within 14 days. And if you don't, then it won't be considered.
You talked about this as the idea being cleaning up, but the reception to it hasn't been, this is just cleaning up some issues. There has been outcry from groups that represent migrants. Tell me what the pushback is about.
Essentially that these provisions are unfair. And you talk about people who enter the country on student visas, and then when those visas are expiring, they file asylum claims. And that can be a genuine problem that the government has a legitimate role in addressing. But at the same time, there might be people who enter the country completely legally, stay here for some time under a visa, and something happens at home that turns them into refugees. Governments change. There's a coup in their country of origin. Their families have begun to be persecuted by a government that was not persecuting them before while they're in Canada on a student permit, and they could very reasonably not want to go back. And so the criticism there is that while this might have legitimate reasoning behind it, it does a whole lot of other things that would be unfair and unjust.
And to your point, here is a spokesperson for the Migrant Rights Network.
What this is a setting up of a mass deportation machine. The government is giving itself unchecked, uncontrolled power to do anything it wants with the immigration system. And it's not just for this government, but any future government. And
it's not just migrant rights groups, David. Tell us what civil liberties groups are worried about.
The fact that we're even having that conversation, both these conversations within one little discussion, I think speaks to how vast the bill is. And it touches on something like 15 federal acts and amends them all. So there's the changes to the migration rules are one vast chunk of it. And then on the civil liberties side, there are things like allowing Canada Post to open letters. And that's an attempt to look for fentanyl that's being shipped through the mail. It doesn't have to be in a big parcel, and the current law is Canada Post can only open parcels with a reason. And then there's a bunch of material in the bill about giving police access to subscriber information to digital services. So in practice, this means things like, hey, who does that internet account belong to? Who does that IP address belong to? And seeking some of the stuff, in some cases without a warrant, and in other cases enabling the government and police authorities to get things that they do need a warrant to get, but this will make it easier for them to do.
You mentioned the fact that there is so much packed into this bill. It's a pretty large piece of legislation. We heard a moment ago Gary Anandasangri saying, well, this is responding to some of the concerns being brought forward by the White House. How much of this bill is really about the border and potential concerns coming from the Americans?
I think, in fairness, a lot of it is about that, although in order to address some of the things that Donald Trump was talking about in November and December, the bill's kind of like a time capsule of things that we were all concerned about several months ago. It deals with border issues, but it kind of takes a step back from the border in a lot of ways. So rather than just controlling people and goods and drugs crossing the border, it goes to try to attack how do illegal migrants who are headed for the States get into Canada in the first place? How do precursors to fentanyl get into Canada so that fentanyl is made and then, in whatever quantity it is, head to the States? So although I think the bill is arguably all about border issues, it touches on many, 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 many other things.
One of the more vocal critics of the legislation so far has been Michael Geist, the University of Ottawa law professor, and he is suggesting that the access to people's data that this legislation seeks is something that, in fact, governments of different stripes have tried to do over the years, and they haven't thus far been successful.
This feels like an opportunistic attempt to bury those provisions that have always been controversial, have always raised the prospect of running afoul of Canadian privacy rules in a bill, hoping that people wouldn't really pay attention.
So, David, should the Liberals expect, you think, a rocky road getting this passed, or are they likely to find a dance partner here with the Conservatives?
Oh, I think there could definitely be a rocky road ahead. The trouble with a bill that is this big and has this many provisions is that if you don't want to pass the bill, you will definitely find something that you can find objectionable, something you can point to and say, no, this one element of it, even if everything is great, even if we agree with the purpose of it, even if we think this is really important, this one aspect of it, I'm sorry, we just can't support that. And a lot of this stuff gets worked out in committee hearings, but another problem with a bill this big and complicated is how long are you going to take to go over a 127-page bill that affects all those other acts? So I don't think it's going to be easy.
Okay, a lot to watch for. Thank you very much for this, David.
Thank you.
The Logic's David Reevely. Tough times if you're young and looking for a job. The employment rate for people aged 15 to 25 has hit more than 14%. And the consequences of that problem could be serious, both for the people looking for work and for Canada's economy.
It sucks. Just trying over and over and over again to get a job or just any sort of income is very hard. Hello, I am Mel Purchase, I am 19 years old, and I'm from Alliston, Ontario. Everyone is trying to find a job, and especially everyone young. Like, everyone in high school is trying to find a job, everyone that's just got out of university and college is trying to find a job, everyone in university and college are trying to find a job for the summer. Like, every single person is looking for work.
Hi, my name's Riley Locke. I am a 25-year-old graduate student at Toronto Metropolitan University. So I have a bit of a professional background. Like, I worked for about 3 years, or 2 to 3 years between my undergrad and my graduate program. So now I'm looking for internships, and that experience has been quite frustrating. And I'm applying for roles that in most cases I would be potentially overqualified for.
I live in a fairly small town, so there is no one hiring in my town. So I've had to start to today I'm out in Barrie and I'm going to Orangeville and just the other bigger towns around where I am to hope that there'll be more jobs there. It's a lot of driving around and going to a bunch of different temp agencies is what I'm mainly doing today to see if they can help me do anything to get me into a certain job, because I would prefer a factory job where I can work in a shop to gain skills into the career that I want to go into, which is welding. So that's my current goal today, is to just go around to temp agencies and put my resume in and just hope for the best and hope that they can figure me something out to help me.
Well, I think part of the issues are the fact that we're seeing a lot of layoffs in the private sector for, entry-level positions or even more senior positions. People are being laid off all over the country in all kinds of different sectors. I have friends that have been working now at their placements for a couple weeks or a month or so now, and they've actually seen some of the mentors that they've been assigned to work under for their internship get laid off. So you'd have people that might be 28, 29 that are looking to just get a summer job through Canada Summer Jobs, when normally those jobs would be kind of reserved for early 20s and, recent graduates and whatnot.
I wonder if there's if there should be more opportunities for the kids who are fresh out of university or fresh out of high school who don't have experience in the real world.
I would be interested in seeing some sort of potentially legislation that requires employers to disclose whether they're using AI tracking systems to review applications, because that can, in my experience, really affect how I'm going to write my cover letter or format my resume and know whether I need to be writing for a human or writing for the robot.
A lot of it has been if you apply online, through Indeed, you either just don't get a response or it'll just be oh, not selected by employer. And then I've gone in and applied for a few places, but I haven't ever gotten a message back from any of them. I'm trying to keep a positive mind and keep an open mind and plan what I want my future to look like, and then figure out how I'm going to accomplish that after I have the plan.
So like I said, I've worked in constituency office, I've worked on campaigns, and my longest experience was actually, I worked for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business for a couple of years. It's been a bit frustrating to kind of come out of having that experience, and now I'm coming into a job market where I have the skills, I have the experience, I've done the legwork, I've done the necessary grunt work to kind of build up some sort of resume for myself, and it feels like I'm applying into the void.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that since we taped that interview with Riley last week, he's landed a job and starts Monday. But many are not so lucky. So what are the long-term effects of youth unemployment, and what can the government do to address the issue? Here to talk more about that is Ilona Doherty. She's the co-creator and managing director of the Youth and Innovation Project at the University of Waterloo, a project that surveys youth about their employment reality. Ilona, welcome to the House.
Thanks so much, Catherine.
Why is it so tough for young people to find a job right now?
So unfortunately, young people are the canary in the coal mine. When the economy is bad, young people are the first ones, very often the first ones to suffer. And we've got an incredibly complex economic situation, but we have other factors. Factors like increasing use of AI, which is impacting entry-level jobs. There's been the temporary foreign worker, the reality that the labor market has had more folks in it, that companies can pay less has impacted young people. It's really a soup of a whole bunch of things that's impacting young youth employment.
I do want to dig into some of those factors in a moment, but first to just help people understand what this looks like on the ground. We just heard a couple of stories. How does that compare to what people are telling you?
This is what we have been hearing for well over a year. I would say, honestly, even more than that since the pandemic. This is not a surprise, which I'm really sad to say. And it's getting worse, but it's not particularly new. So we are certainly hearing about young people who send out hundreds and hundreds of resumes and literally hear nothing.
And some people might think, well, they're going to have to wait longer to find a job. Maybe in some cases, people are going to have to crash with mom and dad longer than they expected. What do you see as the bigger picture, the consequences when people are struggling in the way you just described?
So the research is very, very clear that this has lifelong implications. If a young person isn't able to really start off their career in a really kind of productive way, then this will impact them throughout their lives. So there's a statistic from a U.S. organization that I think really applies to Canada as well. The Centre for American Progress speaks about how 6 months of unemployment at age 22 can lead to 22,000 less income over the next decade. So we're talking about significant impacts for young people. So youth unemployment isn't just an issue, for young people, they'll get over it. This is going to have lifelong implications for this generation.
I'm sure you just put a chill down the spine of some people listening. So let's talk about solutions. We need an upside here. What can governments do to help?
So governments can create opportunities for young people. They can fill the gap when it's an economic downturn by ensuring that there are opportunities for young people. So in the Canadian context, we have, for example, this Canada Summer Jobs Program. We have Youth Employment and Skills Strategy. And the Auditor General actually in 2024 wrote a report. And the evidence in that report is that young people who take part in these programs see increased wages later in life, which is incredible, right? So we know that these programs work, but we also know where governments are, and the federal government particularly is falling short when it comes to these kinds of programs. So we need investment, and I would argue significant immediate investment in these programs, but we also need really good data analysis, which we don't always have with these programs, and we need these programs to be implemented properly. So this is tough stuff. There's no quick fix for this. We need a lot of investment right now if we hope to address this.
If we talk about where the government's thinking is right now, though, you see the Prime Minister is promising a lot of investment in other areas that could create jobs but aren't targeted at young people per se. So he wants to build a lot more homes in Canada. He wants to invest in the defense sector, talks about nation-building projects, things around resources. How much do you think that could change the picture when it comes to youth unemployment?
So that's all well and good. and it could, it definitely will have perhaps trickle-down effects, but there also needs to be a direct strategy that's specifically related to young people. Otherwise, we will not have the workers in the future who are able to do what we need them to do in those industries. And I was really heartened to see that in the Liberal platform, there was mentions about building safer communities funds, steering young people away from criminal activity. Well, the best way to do that is get young people employed. We see the not in employment or training numbers, so the number of young people that we consider quote unquote NEET youth is going up. And
NEET youth?
NEET youth, yes. So not in employment or training. And that is a very likely factor if a young person isn't going to school or isn't in employment, that they will turn to criminal activity. So if we want to build safer communities, we need young people to be employed. We also saw in the Liberal platform a focus on the youth employment strategy, Canada Summer Jobs, the Canada Service Corps, a youth climate corps. Those are all really, really key. So it's in there. Now, what we need is for the federal government not to just talk about how great young people are, which was certainly something we've seen over the last 10 years, but we actually need them to be investing consistently in youth-focused programs.
I want to ask about something else that you mentioned off the top. You talked about temporary foreign workers. Conservative MP Jamil Javani has launched a petition to end the temporary foreign workers program. He explicitly says they're taking jobs away from Canadian workers, holding down wages, and he cites the rise in youth unemployment as a piece of evidence for his argument. What do you make of that?
I think it's a lot more complex than he presents it to be. We've certainly seen a scapegoating of immigrants and especially international students when it comes to housing. And the evidence shows that that isn't actually true, right? Housing costs are not going up just because of international students. And I think temporary foreign workers is a similar dynamic, right? It's easy to scapegoat. However, there is good evidence to show that wages are depressed when companies can rely on temporary foreign workers rather than paying a young person a Canadian young person what is a reasonable wage, and so that is certainly a concern.
Well, and on that note, I do want to quickly ask you about artificial intelligence. You mentioned that as a factor. I mean, I'm interested to hear that it's already impacting the job market. Presumably, that's just going to grow.
I would recommend to this federal government that great that we have a new minister specifically dedicated to artificial intelligence. But this is going to have serious implications and already is having serious implications for what entry-level jobs look like. So a LinkedIn executive in the U.S. spoke about how the bottom rung of the career ladder is broken. It's already broken. Right? So we need to fundamentally rethink what entry-level jobs are going to look like for young people if we hope to have a workforce who, again, is not economically disengaged, in 5 to 10 years.
Ilona, a lot of this may have been hard for people to hear. And so I wonder, in closing, what would you say to someone who is younger, who is struggling to find employment, about finding a way to thrive when things are so challenging?
Sometimes it's just really important to hear that it's not your fault, that there are systemic issues that are happening around you. And so if you've sent out 100 resumes and you haven't gotten a response, it's not you. It's the broader context. And I know that doesn't solve it, but at least hopefully it makes young people feel like, and their parents feel like it's okay, you're not actually doing anything wrong. So it's up to the adults. This is not young people's fault, and we need to fix the problem.
Ilona Doherty, I really appreciate this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thanks, as always, Catherine.
The University of Waterloo's Ilona Doherty. So what can the government do? Patty Hajdu is the Minister of Jobs and Families. I spoke to her Friday morning. Hi, Minister.
Hi. Great to hear your voice.
You too. We just heard about young people who are really struggling to find jobs. We heard about people who are sending out hundreds of resumes and getting nowhere. What can you do for them?
Well, listen, I also heard that, and it is obviously dependent on where they live and the challenges in their particular work, the work atmosphere in terms of their own communities. But I will say that there are a number of different supports for young people that the Government of Canada offers, particularly in the area of skills training. I think immediately what young people will be happy to hear is that we've managed to add another 6,000 jobs to the Canada Summer Jobs Program. And so for an immediate release valve, youth age 15 to 30, 6,000 more of them will be able to find jobs across the country. This is late breaking news, but I think super important to be able to help with the sort of urgency this summer.
As you say, though, late breaking, and only really a fraction, I believe it's 70,000 jobs in the program, you're adding 6, so less than a 10% increase. Beyond Canada Summer Jobs, what can you do to make a difference? Because we just heard from Ilona Doherty the need for the government to act immediately and with force.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, first of all, we support, as you know, through labor market transfers to provinces and territories, a huge amount of youth employment and skills programming. So every community that has a Yes Employment program, there's a significant portion of that program that's funded through federal dollars that are transferred to provinces and territories. It's one of the best ways, actually, to get kids in jobs is to utilize those on-the-ground services that are often, really skilled professionals that have been working with youth ages 15 to 30 for a long time, trying to match their skill set, do some, job prep, resume prep, bring people's skills up to standard so that they can actually compete in the workforce. I would say that there are a number of other things that we can continue to do and that we need to enhance. Things like the student work placement program that provides for work integrated learning. This allows for youth all ages who are enrolled in post-secondary to get actually good quality work in their field, placed with employers that many times will keep those youth as they're graduating. And then there are a number of different supports that we provide federally to make sure that kids can actually get through this course of study, whether it's apprenticeship or whether it's post-secondary education. And you will know and remember that last mandate, we alleviated interest on student loans, for example, and we'll continue to do that. I think there's some really exciting opportunities coming up, though, that are in our platform for the next term. And that is, for example, expanding the mandates for that student work placement program that I told you about that's showing and demonstrating incredible success. And I would say that some of the programs around Youth Climate Corps that's in the platform providing paid skills training for young people to quickly respond to climate emergencies. We're certainly seeing that this summer. Support recovery and strengthen their resilience will help.
I said off the top the urgency here. How quickly can you get moving on some of those things?
Well, I think there's some things we can do immediately. And, today's announcement about the additional Canada Summer Jobs, while I recognize it's not going to solve the entire problem, is a huge help for 6,000 more kids across the country, bringing our total number to 76,000 jobs. I think that there's a conversation happening with provinces and territories right now about how to better align the federal government's investments with what they're doing in the workforce. And look, this is an all hands on deck moment. We actually have to work together to be able to achieve these things. Finally, I would just say that the ambition of this government is to make sure that we can build things across the country in record speed. And that's going to require skilled tradespeople. So we'll be heavily investing in opportunities for young people to improve their opportunities if they're interested and desire a career in the trades, which, by the way, are vast. There are many, many different trades, and they are extremely well paying.
Although, as we just heard a few moments ago, the importance of making sure that some of that is, as you were saying, they're targeted at young people and not just sort of a blanket opening of the gates. In that regard, in terms of getting people into the workforce, I do want to ask you about one other thing that Ilona Doherty mentioned to us, which is this question of artificial intelligence. A LinkedIn executive recently wrote that it has broken the bottom rung of the career ladder, that the model we've had for professional career paths is unraveling. Is that an issue for the private sector, maybe the education sector, or is this something that you believe your government needs to try to fix?
Well, again, I don't think there's one single stakeholder here that can have all the keys to fixing the disruption that we're seeing in AI. And I would say I am certainly seeing it as well. I mean, AI is a powerful tool. It can certainly help companies. It can help, all kinds of organizations do things more efficiently. But I think, I am, as a Minister of Jobs and Families, deeply concerned about what AI disruption is going to mean to the sort of lower paid employees in our workforce. And that's why I think it's important that we take a step back and reassess the workforce strategy that we've had for a number of years that needs to be refreshed to incorporate the disruption that AI presents. I mean, I would just say that the data is still unclear to the degree of the disruption, whether or not the disruption means that jobs are being eliminated or changed. I would say that the opportunities through the mid-career skills training grant that is in our platform is tremendously helpful in this space. I think it's a deep interest and concern of the Prime Minister, the obviously opportunity of AI, but also the disruptive nature in the workforce was front and center when he included this mid-career training grant available to individuals to help address that rapid need for skills training and pivoting sometimes from one career to another, or sometimes to enhance skills that are going to help you maintain your foothold in a very rapidly changing workforce.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Patty Hajdu is the Minister of Jobs and Families. Marc Garneau did something incredible and historic. He was the first Canadian in space, but he did a lot of other remarkable things too before passing away this week at the age of 76. Garneau was president of the Canadian Space Agency, Minister of Transport, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Last fall, Garneau published his memoir, and he went with House producer Jennifer Chevalier to the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum to talk about his life and some of the lessons he'd learned. Here's part of their conversation.
So we've come into an exhibit here that replicates what it's like to look at Earth from space.
Yes, through the cupola of the space station, which is wonderful because it has 6 side windows and one big window that you can, and when you're facing downwards most of the time, so you can look out and you can see Earth. It's just spectacular.
You wrote in your book that words don't do justice to how you felt when you looked at the Earth from space. If you could find a few words for world leaders, what would you tell them?
For world leaders, well, I would tell them that the experience of going into space, and I wish they could all do it, where they would see that all of humanity lives on this planet, all 8 billion of us in about 200 countries, and that we are surrounded by the blackness, the void of space, and that this is not only the cradle of humanity, it's our only home, and we have to take care of it. That change in perspective when you go around the Earth every 90 minutes is something that stays with you for the rest of your life.
The museum is playing classical music in this part of the exhibit. That's what you listen to in space too, isn't it?
I did. I took, the first time I flew, we used Walkman. We don't hear about those anymore. But I would listen to that and look out the window, and it's just a sublime experience to do that. I mean, listening to good music is already fantastic, but while you're gazing at your planet as you're orbiting high above it and going around is just, it's, I think, the closest thing to being in heaven.
Garneau's wife said he died peacefully after a short illness, surrounded by his family. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, and Victoria Valito. And our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Thanks also to Miguel Plant. I am Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.